For the last century, they've been offered a state of their own, and they refused because their goal is not to create a state for themselves.
The declaration landed like a storm across the international stage. In a move that caught not only Africa but the wider world by surprise, reports spread that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had delivered a startling ultimatum to the young leader of Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré: step down or surrender within 48 hours. At first, many observers brushed it off as exaggerated rumor, perhaps just another attempt at political theater. Could it truly be possible that one of the Middle East's most influential figures, backed by decades of global alliances, would risk issuing such a daring threat to a rising African president? And if it was genuine, what could have driven such drastic action? The roots of the conflict were not in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, but in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, where Traoré had been pursuing bold reforms. His openly anti-colonial vision, his refusal to allow foreign exploitation of African wealth, and his unwavering commitment to sovereignty had made him a symbol of defiance. Across the continent, people saw him as an emblem of courage, renewal, and dignity. Yet history has always shown that defiance attracts powerful enemies. From rejecting foreign military installations to challenging the global financial order and forming stronger ties with nations outside the sphere of Western and Israeli influence, Traoré's policies shook the established powers. They feared he was awakening a new African consciousness. Netanyahu's statement, therefore, was not merely directed at Burkina Faso. It symbolized a reaction to a broader shift happening in the global balance of power. The Middle East and Africa are deeply connected through history, trade, culture, and politics. A figure like Traoré, willing to challenge the status quo, posed a serious threat to systems of control that had endured for generations. The demand, 48 hours to leave office or give up power, sounded less like modern diplomacy and more like the echo of an ancient empire warning a rebellious territory. Yet this was not the era of pharaohs or emperors. This was the year 2025, a time when voices of ordinary people had grown too loud, too united, and too determined to be silenced easily. Why then would Israel take such an aggressive approach? Why such a public confrontation with Ibrahim Traoré? The answer lay within three key areas: politics, religion, and narrative control. Politically, Israel has long considered Africa an important ground for alliances. The sway of African votes at the United Nations, access to vital resources, and influence over governments across the continent have been a central part of its foreign strategy since its inception. But Traoré refused to play according to those rules. His message was unambiguous. Africa would no longer serve as a pawn, neither for Western powers nor for Middle Eastern interests. Religiously, the conflict carried even deeper weight. Traoré often spoke with boldness about faith, urging both Christians and Muslims in Africa to return to the uncorrupted teachings of their prophets, stripped of political manipulation. His words resonated far beyond Africa, gathering millions of listeners worldwide. For elites, including Netanyahu, such speeches were seen as dangerous. They threatened the delicate balance between religion and politics that had been used as a tool of control for generations. Narratively, the battle for the story itself may have been the most important front. Israel, with its vast global media reach, feared the rise of a charismatic African leader like Traoré, capable of reshaping the global conversation. His speeches, often going viral, challenged uncomfortable truths about colonialism, imperialism, and resource exploitation. Thus, Netanyahu's ultimatum was more than a simple political warning. It was an attempt to silence a voice growing too powerful to be ignored. As news of the ultimatum spread, the world's attention sharpened. Journalists parsed every phrase, analysts debated its implications, and citizens across continents wondered aloud, what will Traoré do? Will he yield under pressure? Will he retreat into silence? Or will he answer with the same fearless energy that had defined his rule? For 2 days, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, on the eve of the deadline, Ibrahim Traoré emerged with his answer. But before reaching that moment, one had to understand the scale of what was at stake. Israel has always presented itself as a small, yet formidable nation, surviving in a hostile region through strategy, strength, and intelligence. Netanyahu, its long-standing leader, has a reputation for tough diplomacy. His ultimatum to Burkina Faso was not aimed only at Traoré. It was a message directed at Africa: comply or face consequences. Yet Traoré was unlike other leaders. He was young, fearless, and deeply bound to his people. His philosophy was not anchored in relationships with superpowers, but in the trust of his citizens. Time and again in his speeches, he reminded Africans that no empire, regardless of its might, was everlasting. He evoked history: the fall of Rome, the collapse of colonial systems, the decline of dictatorships, and argued that Israel, like all nations, must also respect the sovereignty of others. The countdown to the 48-hour deadline turned into a global drama. News stations provided updates as if war could break out at any moment. In churches, mosques, and busy marketplaces across Africa, people speculated: would Israel truly dare attempt such a bold act against a sitting African president? Social media lit up. Some defended Israel, suggesting that Traoré's speeches had gone too far. Others criticized Israel's influence in Africa, while a growing number rallied behind Traoré, seeing him as David standing up to Goliath, a symbol of an Africa that would no longer bow. The pressure was immense, but Traoré did not waver. Instead, he prepared a message directed not just at Netanyahu but at the world. When he finally spoke, his words carried far beyond Burkina Faso. He began calmly, without anger, and acknowledged Netanyahu's ultimatum. But instead of fear, he displayed a faint smile. He reminded the world that leaders who rule through intimidation are already trapped by their own insecurities. Then, with a quiet conviction, he declared that Africa was not a continent to be bullied. For centuries, he said, our resources were looted, our people enslaved, our cultures suppressed. And still, we endured. Today, Israel may think it can give me 48 hours, but Africa has survived 400 years of oppression. We will not bow to 48 hours of threats. Those words ignited a spark across the continent. Crowds roared with approval in Mali, Niger, Ghana, Nigeria, and beyond. The ultimatum had backfired. Rather than isolating Traoré, it had unified Africans in defense of sovereignty. Netanyahu, despite his vast power, suddenly found himself cornered morally. The more he pressed, the stronger Traoré appeared. The more he threatened, the more Africans stood firm with their leader. But Traoré did not stop there. He turned directly toward the people of Israel, bypassing Netanyahu's authority. In a bold statement, he declared, "I do not speak against Jews nor against Israel as a people. I speak against arrogance, the belief that one nation has the right to dictate the fate of another. I believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but I also believe this God does not bless oppression." The effect was immediate and powerful. By separating the people of Israel from the aggressive politics of their leader, Traoré shifted the debate entirely. Netanyahu's ultimatum now appeared not as a calculated strategy but as a moral blunder, and the world began to listen with new ears. As the 48-hour deadline expired, Netanyahu's threat remained unfulfilled. Traoré had not fled, had not surrendered, and had not backed down. Instead, he stood ready to speak again, not just to Burkina Faso, but to the entire globe. The deadline had passed, and the world braced for Israel's next move. But to everyone's surprise, Ibrahim Traoré remained unshaken. Rather than panicking or retreating into silence, he chose the opposite path. He spoke again, with a calm but unyielding conviction. This time, his words echoed not only across Africa, but also in capitals around the world. In a televised address streamed across multiple platforms, Traoré sat at a plain wooden desk. He was not surrounded by generals or armed guards, but by everyday citizens, farmers, students, mothers, and elders. The scene was intentional, a message that his true strength came not from weapons or foreign alliances, but from his people. He began by turning directly to Netanyahu's ultimatum. "You gave me 48 hours, he said slowly, but who gave you the authority to decide the fate of an African nation? Was it God? Was it history? Or was it arrogance that blinded you to the truth? That no leader, no matter how powerful, has the right to dictate to another people?" His words were not shouted. They were precise and sharp, like a blade cutting through centuries of lies. Then he turned his attention toward the citizens of Israel themselves. "To the people of Israel," he continued, "I hold no hostility. I respect your endurance, your struggles, and your history of surviving oppression. But let me remind you, oppression does not become righteous simply because it is carried out by those who were once oppressed. If you truly believe in justice, then justice must exist not only for yourselves, but for all. This statement struck a deep chord. Analysts quickly realized that Traoré was hinting at the Palestinian question, a subject that had long divided international opinion. His boldness in speaking indirectly about it sent shockwaves across media outlets. Some commentators accused him of fueling division, while others praised him for voicing a truth many had avoided. Then Traoré lifted his voice beyond politics and into history. We Africans have endured slavery. We have suffered colonialism. We have lived under dictators funded from abroad. For generations we were told we were too weak, too divided, too poor. Yet here we are, still standing. And today I say, if anyone believes Africa will kneel to ultimatums, they have not learned our history. We did not survive centuries of chains only to submit to 48 hours of threats. The citizens gathered around him erupted in applause, their cheers captured by microphones, their unity adding weight to his words. Across the continent, people celebrated. In Nigeria, students marched while chanting his name. In South Africa, activists compared him to Mandela, another leader who once stood up to global giants without flinching. In Ghana, officials hailed him as a defender of African honor. In Israel, however, the response was split. Netanyahu's supporters denounced Traoré's words as reckless provocation. But unexpectedly, many Israeli citizens and even religious leaders admired his courage. Some rabbis publicly stated that his speech revealed uncomfortable truths that their own society needed to confront. In Palestine, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Leaders there praised him as a long-awaited voice for justice, with one scholar remarking, "From Africa, a voice rises that speaks for all the oppressed." Meanwhile, in Washington, Paris, Cairo, and Abuja, leaders monitored the situation carefully. Intelligence agencies prepared daily briefings, uncertain of what would come next. For the Biden administration, this was a particularly delicate moment. America's traditional alliance with Israel clashed with the growing popularity of Traoré, especially among younger Americans who were sharing clips of his speeches across TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. Many of them called him the people's president. Netanyahu, on the other hand, suddenly found himself trapped. His plan had been to frighten Traoré into submission. Instead, the young African leader had turned the ultimatum into a platform, gaining even greater moral authority. What was meant to weaken him had made him stronger. Netanyahu now appeared before the world not as a strategist but as a bully, but Traoré did not stop at speeches. Within days, he announced an unexpected initiative, a summit to be held in Ouagadougou. He invited Jewish rabbis, Muslim imams, Christian pastors, village chiefs, and young activists from both Africa and Israel. The purpose was to begin a dialogue of truth and justice, not between governments, but between ordinary people. His message was simple: peace cannot be achieved through intimidation, only through honest conversation rooted in equality. The announcement left political analysts stunned. Some doubted it would ever take place. Others called it a masterstroke, forcing Israel to either engage in dialogue or face isolation. When the summit finally began, the world watched closely. Delegates from different faiths and communities gathered under one roof. Cameras captured powerful moments, rabbis embracing imams, Christian pastors shaking hands with African chiefs, and young students from Burkina Faso holding hands with Israeli peace activists. In his opening address, Traoré declared, "We are not against Israel. We are not against Jews. We are not against Christians. We are not against Muslims. We are against arrogance. We are against oppression. We are against any system that divides humanity into rulers and ruled masters and slaves, chosen and forgotten. Such a system has no place in this century." The audience rose to its feet in thunderous applause. The moment was described as historic, a turning point that showed how one leader's courage could transform a threat into a movement. From Jerusalem, reports suggested Netanyahu was furious. His advisors admitted privately that he had underestimated Traoré, dismissing him as just another fiery African leader who would soon be silenced. Instead, Traoré's influence had grown far beyond Africa. His speeches were spreading globally, embraced by the oppressed, the marginalized, and those yearning for dignity. In the end, Netanyahu quietly abandoned his ultimatum. There was no military action, no enforcement, no further threats. His silence itself was proof that Traoré had won the moral battle. But for Traoré, this was never about personal victory. In his closing remarks at the summit, he made that clear. This was never about me versus Netanyahu. It was about Africa versus arrogance, the oppressed versus the oppressor, truth versus falsehood. Let it be known, Africa will not be dictated to, not in 48 hours, not in 48 years, not ever again. His words thundered through the hall, echoed across cities and villages, and spread throughout social media. Across the continent, murals of his face appeared on walls, his quotes printed on banners, his speeches replayed endlessly. In the eyes of millions, Ibrahim Traoré had not only survived Netanyahu's ultimatum, he had transformed it into a defining moment of African dignity and global resistance. What began as an attempt to silence an African leader had instead forced the world to reconsider its views on Israel, Africa, and the balance of justice itself. Netanyahu's ultimatum was designed to humble Traoré, but instead, it humbled Netanyahu before the court of global opinion. In the end, the lesson was larger than either leader. It showed that courage, when rooted in truth and supported by the people, can turn threats into triumphs. Ibrahim Traoré's name now carried a meaning beyond his office. It had become a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even when given only 48 hours to surrender, the human spirit can rise and claim victory. And as this story spreads across the world, I invite you to stand with it, to carry its message further. If you believe in truth, in justice, and in the courage to resist oppression, then don't forget to subscribe so that more voices like this can be heard.